So welcome to week 4 of Political Science 1101, Introduction to American Politics. And this week what we're going to be doing is covering the media and interest groups. And as a reminder, one of the movies, of which there are 2, but one of them is going to be due this coming week, and that is The Post. I'll talk more about that and what you should be planning for with your personal journal. But then we'll also cover interest groups in terms of what they are and how they influence political behavior in American politics. So just as a kind of recap as to where we are, I generally like to start off each of these weekly introductory videos with just a sense of where things are and how, again, I'm approaching the game of politics. Again, as a kind of recap, we've got the circular approach to thinking about the game of politics, and that game is focused on power. Power leads to politics. Politics is the expression, the means by which executing that power that you have. Once you execute that power through politics, you get policy. Government choosing to do something, government choosing not to do something. When government makes a choice, it creates bias, favoritism potentially to one group over the other, and that leads us back to the group that has power. So just as a quick recap, that kind of circular approach. And I also talk about the fact that I approach it as a game. And so certainly over the past couple of weeks, we have discussed a lot about the game's ideas. Most notably, the ideas of federalism and just wrapping up constitutionalism. And again, if you want to think about those two ideas, what the Constitution brings to the game, what federalism brings to the game, it's really a sense of how to approach playing the game. And again, the game is about power. And what constitutionalism and federalism does is that it divides power. One way to divide power is vertically, through federalism, national governments, state governments, local governments. The other way to divide power is horizontally, through checks and balances, through separate institutions sharing power. That's oftentimes best described through the Constitution's structures. So really, a lot of this is talking about the strategies about governing power, how to deal with it, how it's dealt with, who gets to play with governing power at different levels in different approaches. So now we're kind of with the start of the back half of last week with public opinion. We're into the notion of what we in political science call political behavior. And this is best thought of as who are the players in politics. There are a lot of players, and we'll get to a lot more as we work through the next couple of weeks. But really, this is an approach to understanding who plays the game of politics. And of course, what we covered last time was the opinion of the public. Certainly, citizens are key players, and their opinions shape the game. They shape how the game might be played. They shape who plays in the game. Public opinion really does have an influence on the game of politics, particularly when it comes to approaching politics, the means, the different methods by which you can play the game. But in addition, the game can shape citizens' opinions as well. And we'll see other players in this that happen to shape public opinion as well. So there's a lot of reciprocation, a lot of different relationships going on back and forth between the players and the game of politics. Now remember, all of these link citizens to the government. And we're going to be talking about this week 2 other important linkage mechanisms. And I'll go back through the chart that I gave previously about it. The media in Chapter 8 and then also interest groups in Chapter 10. I'm kind of not following the book, but I'm putting these pieces together to hopefully build towards the next week's material on political parties and then voting and elections. So let me just briefly go back over the linkage mechanism idea for how citizens get connected to the government, to politics, through the different areas. Remember, in the political behavior aspect of the game of politics, all governing power rests with citizens, we the people. But we need to have some linkage to our government. And that is oftentimes done through things like public opinion, interest groups that we'll be covering this week, campaigns and elections, political parties, the media. Remember that citizens interact and are interacted by all of these different aspects of political behavior. And what political behavior allows citizens to do is to then influence and shape the institutions of government. The Congress, the presidency, the courts, the bureaucracy. Out of those institutions of government come our public policies. And then what happens? The public policies impact the citizens. So this is just a brief recap in terms of how I see some of the players in the game of politics influencing how ultimately the institutions, the government structures behave. And remember, these are called linkage mechanisms. So if you come across that term, if you hear me talking about it, that's what I'm talking about, the linkage between the citizens and the institutions of government. Some questions to consider about the media. The media plays a huge role in terms of how American politics gets played out. And some of the things that you'll be reading about in this week's chapter are about the different types of media. We have seen an explosion over the past 50 years of different types of media and how have each developed. The United States and American politics have had a long relationship between the media and politics. It goes back to the founding of the Republic, particularly the ratification of the Constitution. You'll read about each of those developments, particularly the newer developments, particularly social media, in terms of how it's influencing our politics. What does the media provide to citizens and government? As you're reading the chapter, think about how the media helps to link citizens to the government. What are the linkage mechanisms by which the media interact with citizens to their government? How does the government influence and shape the media? It's not just a one-way street as that linkage mechanism diagram shows, but the relationship goes back and forth between the institutions and the political behavior. And then for your personal journal entry this week, you'll be reflecting on your viewing of The Post, a movie about the issue of the Pentagon Papers in the late 1960s into the 1970s. And the movie, I think, particularly the back half of it, really helps to set up the dynamic of some real controversies when it comes to the role of the media, particularly the press, and the role of government. It'll be something that I want you to reflect on. And then finally, how does the media shape and influence politics, and particularly thinking about it from a game idea? In the back half of the week, we're going to be talking about interest groups. And here again, some basic information. What is an interest group? What are the different types of interest groups? And what do they offer to American politics? Again, they're part of the linkage mechanisms, but how specifically do they bring citizens to interacting with the government? What are some of the issues that interest groups run into when trying to influence politics? The field and study of interest groups has really dove into and really explored a lot of the issues about interest groups, how they form, how they develop, how they seek to persuade the government. but there are some issues that interest groups run into, something to think about. What are the various ways and approaches that interest groups attempt to influence government and American politics? We've all heard the term lobbying, and that is something that certainly a lot of interest groups engage in, but there are other activities that expand the civic engagement for citizens by interest group activities. And then finally, how are interest groups regulated in their attempt to influence government and American politics? Just like with the media, government can regulate activities, but there have been controversies about the regulation and how far interest groups can be regulated by the government. So at the end of this week, you should be able to understand the various types of media that operate in American politics, as well as the different types of interest groups that seek to influence American politics. These are two core areas of political behavior, along with public opinion, along with political parties and political parties, along with elections, campaigns, voting. These are kind of the core set of areas of political behavior. You should also understand how the media and interest groups influence American politics, but just as conversely, how is the media and interest groups regulated when they try to influence American politics? And then finally, explore some of the controversies between the media in particularly and the government regarding the controversy over the Pentagon Papers. Again, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to me. Use the Dr. Bitzer I Need Help section. Send me an email. I'm happy to help schedule a time to help you work your way through this material. Thanks and good luck.